leave it up to Tom Spears, Dr. Tom Spears, to talk about an instantiation in multi-millennial tapestry of, wow, that's like, I mean, the education you receive at times here. Amazing. Actually, I do want to say this, and I love Tom, and what he has put together for this night. I understand if you're like a sacred music history night. Listen, I've gone through the content and looked through it all. You know, like those nights when you're like doom scrolling through Netflix or whatever it is, you're like, I don't know what to watch. And then finally you're like, here's the History Channel. And like, then you're sucked in for like 3 hours or whatever it is. Or those things like, listen, I'm telling you, it is so good where he's just going to bring you through these things and just, it is going to be a rich night as we start this series on the poets and everything that we have for this, as we are going to walk through everything from Job to Ecclesiastes to Proverbs to the Song of Songs and to Psalms. And just going through these, I'm excited for what we're going to have as we enter in this space, because these poets, they have so much to teach us about wisdom and about worship. Because those are two things we need, is to know how to live in wisdom and to know how to worship. And in the Bible, at times it feels like it's one giant book, but it's not. It's, as we've said with the Year of Biblical Literacy, it is a library of books. And the poets exist to give us something the other pieces don't. And in many ways, you could say it's these two things of wisdom and worship that affect the way we live now and affect the way our lives go. And so it's so important that we step into these and spend time with these. And today we begin with Job, which in the words of Robert Alter, one of the great Hebrew scholars, he says, Job is the most mysterious of all the ancient Hebrew books. And its poetry is unlike anything else. It has the highest poetry in all of Scripture contained in its pages. It's on par with Homer and Shakespeare and Milton. The writer of Job is incredible in what he has crafted and the work that he's produced. The way it works both with wordplay and with sound play that we unfortunately don't get in English. But in Hebrew, it rhymes with a cadence and a canter that brings you through the text, seeing some of the greatest poetry ever put together in the history of mankind, let alone just ancient Near Eastern history. And it opens with these words of, a man there was in a land of Uz, whose name was Job. And that's probably the best we're going to get to giving you some of the poetic nature of how that works, because there's just no way English can carry it out. But it starts with this folklore-like beginning. Certainly Job was a man, existed. And yet in this story opens almost like when Nathan brought the story to David that we shared last week. They start the same way. 2 men there were in the land, David. And this one, a man there was in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. Now, this is one of those things where we have a chance to look at some of the stuff we've done in the past with Bible Project videos to see how they've summarized some of this. And I thought, instead of just listening to me give this to you, it'd be really good just to take a few minutes here and just capture an overview of the book that we're about to walk through. Because we're going to just take a tour through it today and come to an understanding of what it means to live in suffering. Because every single one of you here, what is true is that you will suffer, that you are suffering, that you've gone through suffering. Because that is the human condition, which raises the human question of where is God in the midst of suffering? And so take a look at this intro video.
So Job begins with a strange story that takes place up in the heavens, which are described something like a heavenly command center. So God is there with these angelic creatures called the sons of God, and they're all there reporting for duty.
And God points out this guy Job, his servant, showing how righteous and good he is.
And then one of these angelic creatures approaches. He's referred to in Hebrew as the Satan.
The Satan. Who is this?
Well, this word is actually a title, which literally means the one who is opposed. So out of this whole crew, he is the one questioning how God is running the world. And he proposes that Job might not actually love God, that he's only a good person because God rewards him. If God were to take away all of the good things he gave to Job, then we would see his true colors.
So he thinks Job is just working the system?
That's exactly right. Maybe he's obeying just to get what he wants.
So God agrees to this experiment and allows the Satan to inflict suffering on Job.
And Job loses everyone and everything that he cares about. It is devastating. And remember, he deserves none of this. God himself said so.
The remarkable thing is that in the midst of all this suffering, Job still praises God.
At least for chapters 1 and 2. But then in chapter 3, we find out how he's really feeling inside. He unleashes this poem that reveals this devastation. It's a long, elaborate curse on the day that he was born.
After this, some of Job's friends come to visit him to offer their help. And all of them are like, Job, you must have done something horribly wrong to deserve this. After all, we know God is just, and we know the world is ordered by God's justice and fairness, so you must be getting what you deserve.
And for the next 34 chapters, the friends and Job go back and forth in very dense Hebrew poetry. His friends keep speculating about why God might have sent such suffering, and they even start making up lists of hypothetical sins that Job must have committed. But after each accusation, Job defends his innocence.
And Job is innocent.
He is. He's also on an emotional roller coaster. At some moments, he's very confident that God is still wise and just.
Yeah, in other moments, he's doubting God's goodness.
He even comes to accuse God of being reckless, unfair, and corrupt. So by the end of the dialogue, Job demands that God come and explain himself in person, and God does so. He comes in the form of a great storm cloud.
Now, God doesn't give Job a direct answer. He doesn't tell Job about the conversation with the Satan.
Yeah, he does something very different. He takes Job on a virtual tour of the universe. He shows Job how grand the world is, and he asks him if he's even capable of running it or understanding it, just for a day. He shows Job how much detail there is in the world, things that we might see every day, but really don't understand at all. But God does. He knows it all intimately. He pays attention to the beauty and operations of the universe in ways that we haven't even imagined and in places that we will never see.
Then to conclude, God shows Job two wondrous beasts and brags about how great they are.
Yeah, they are dangerous. I mean, they would kill you without even thinking about it. And God says they're not evil. They're actually a part of his good world.
And then that's it. That's God's whole defense. It's kind of weird. I mean, what was this all about?
It seems to be this. From Job's point of view, it looks like God is not just. But God's perspective is infinitely bigger. He's dynamically interacting with a whole universe of complexity when he makes decisions. And this is what God calls his wisdom.
So Job asking God to defend himself is actually kind of absurd.
He couldn't comprehend this kind of complexity even if he wanted to.
So where does this leave us?
Well, it leaves Job in a place of humility. He never learned why he suffered, and yet he's able to live in peace and in the fear of the Lord.
But that's not where the book ends, because after this, God restores to Job double everything he had lost. And this, again, is surprising. I mean, is this a reward? Is God saying, congratulations, Job, you passed this elaborate test?
No, I mean, the whole book just made the point that Job losing everything was not a punishment, and so now getting it back isn't a reward.
So why does he get it back?
Well, apparently, God, in his wisdom, decided to give Job a gift. We don't know why. But what we do know is that Job is now the kind of person who, no matter what comes, good or bad, he can trust God's wisdom.
Learning to trust the wisdom of God. This is the book of Job, a book that asks, how do we have wisdom in the midst of so much suffering? On Wednesday, I'm going to get in my car and drive to Virginia to be with my cousin and family as he, several weeks ago, lost his 17-year-old daughter in a car accident. That's suffering. And how do you process those things? Especially when you've been a good man. Not perfect, but a good man. How do we deal with that? And how do we look at a world that seems so full of injustice and a God who calls himself just and goes, how can that be? What does that mean in this space? But the book of Job, it has an effect of essentially peeling back the layers for us to get a glimpse behind the scenes. And it opens for us a window into the interlocking realms of heaven and earth and how they move together, the way we see things in heaven and the way we see things here on earth. And we are shown that the realm of heaven is what affects the realm of earth. As above, so below. And it's important because the ancients got that wrong. They thought as below, so above. If I can make enough sacrifices, harvest enough crops to give a big gift, to do all this stuff, I will affect the heavens and it will respond to my desires, my needs, my wants. I can control the gods by giving and sacrificing a certain amount of stuff, all the way up to the sacrifice of our own children. And so they would offer that up to try to move the heavens. But what Job does is he flips it and he says, no, it is what goes on above that determines what happens here below. And to see that movement, that it's always been a heaven to earth movement. And the ancients, they didn't know that, they didn't get that. And Job is so countercultural to what it's saying is going on. But it's also something we need to hear. Because we do that. All the time, we make these micro agreements, these almost subconscious things where we think, okay, if I do this, and I'll make a bargain with God. I'll do this thing, I'll stop doing this thing, and then God, you'll give me this thing. And we just have this kind of game in our head that we go on of like, if I give this up, or if I do this thing, or if I have this thing, then that will move the heart of God, and that will do something. So I'll figure out how to make sacrifices here to affect what goes on there. And Job goes, no, can I actually open up the heavenly throne room for you to see that it's as above, so below, not as below, so above? Because we have to get this. I think it causes so many problems for us when we think that. Now, I'm not talking about cause and effect, right? I'm not talking like you go out, you drink a bunch, you get in the car, you drive, you get pulled over, maybe you do something worse, you get into an accident, and then you're like, why is this happening to me? Because you're an idiot. That's why it happened to you. That was dumb. You shouldn't do that. That's cause and effect. This isn't about the things that have these cause and effect pieces to them. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right? There is that. This is suffering that seems unjust, unfair, unwarranted. I didn't do anything. Why is this going on? Why do I now have the diagnosis of a brain tumor? God, I've pursued you with my life. What's happening here? Of course that question's going to come. And so Job opens up this scene. But it starts with earth. And it's a reminder that we are taking our minds not merely to be here on this earth, but also to heaven and to the world that's to come as those two things come together as one. And so it begins in earth and moves to heaven. Here's the opening line in the NIV of Job. It said, in the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. See, some translations are not as poetic as others. But this man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. And he had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Now listen, you have to keep this line in mind as you walk through the book of Job. That this is the clearest picture you get about how God saw Job. That he was blameless and upright. He feared God and he shunned evil. In fact, it repeats this almost verbatim on the next page. This is who Job is. Because as you're going to see all the words that are shared back and forth, it's so easy to lose sight of the man he really was. A man who was blameless and upright, who feared God and shunned evil, if that would be said of us. And this man Job, he had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. This is what was said of Job. This man was an upright man, a righteous man, a good man, and also a very ridiculously wealthy man. Like, just for some accounting numbers here, just to see this: 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 ox, 500 donkeys, 10 kids. Bro's loaded. I mean, in terms of, this is like how they kept their bank accounts, right? Do you understand? They did not have banks where they go put in their money. They had herds and flocks and children. This is what guaranteed retirement and security and safety. And he had it all. He had everything. And in one moment, it will all come crashing down. And so as it shifts from the earthly scene to the heavenly scene, we find that one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. In the Hebrew, it says the sons of God came to present themselves. It's this divine council that meets with God and are there. It says they come to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. And this is, in Hebrew, it's not a proper name. It's actually a title. It says Hasatan, the Satan, the accuser, the adversary. And so it's like all of them come together. God, his council of sons, and then the Satan. And they all come together in this space. And God is going to have a question for him. He said to the Satan, "Where have you come from?" And he answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Which is the equivalent of like a teenager response, like, "Where have you been?" They go, "Wherever I want to be, doing what I want to do." Like, I mean, it's just so sarcastic in the way that this comes back. I'm roaming the earth, doing what I want, going back and forth. What's it to you? Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." There it is. Like, here is who he is. A man who's blameless and upright, who fears God and shuns evil. This is Job. This is him. And you have to hang on to how God sees Job. Now, the other part is, it's like you read this and you're like, "Have you considered my servant Job?" It's almost like God's like dangling a cat toy in front of him. Like, "Hey, what do you think about Job here?" Like, you want to take a swipe? You want to like take a bite? Like, what? It seems as though that's what he's doing when you read it this way. But can I actually show you what's called the Amplified version, or sorry, it's not the Amplified, it's Young's literal translation, which is trying to give a best word for word translation from the Hebrew. And Jehovah, which is uses the word Yahweh for God there. Jehovah saith, and you got to get some good Shakespeare every now and then. So like, he saith unto the adversary, "Hast thou set thy heart against my servant Job? Because there is none like him in the land." Do you hear like how that changes? What's going on there? Where God's like, as you're going back and forth on earth doing the things you want to do, have you set your heart against my servant Job? I see, it's like him going, "I see what you're doing. I know what you're up to. I didn't ask the question of where were you coming from, where you going, for my benefit. I know what you're doing. And are you turning your heart against my servant Job? Are you going after him, a man perfect and upright, fearing God and turning aside from him? Is that what you're doing?" And they go back and forth, as we just saw in the video, where he says he's only following you because you give him things. If you take it away, he'll curse you. That's it. It's over. Rover. Once you take the good things away, man does not care about you. You do not care about them. It's a game. And God's like, "All right, have at it." And we start to see something Job never sees. The reason why all these things are about to befall him has nothing to do with what Job did. In fact, God says he's perfect, upright, fearing me, and turning aside from evil. Yet, what Job is about to experience is tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy. He's going to lose his wealth. He's going to lose his home. He's going to lose his kids. And then lastly, his health. all of it ripped away until where he just finally has his own wife come to him and pretty much loses her. And as everything just goes wrong, everything is taken away, everything is destroyed. And she comes to him on page 2. She says this, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. Be done. Like, it's over. Like, this is ridiculous. Just curse him and die." And it's at this point, his friends get word of like, what's going on, that something has happened. And so they want to come and visit him. Look what it says as the friends show up. "When Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him." Like, we just want to be with our friend. Like, we're going to go. And so look what they do. They come, they sit. They saw him from a distance. They could hardly recognize him. He'd become like a shell of his former self. And they began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. And there's some wisdom in that. You know, like, when I go to Virginia this week, my plan in a lot of ways is just to sit, just be there. I don't have to say a thing. And when you are with people who are suffering, just understand this. Some of the greatest thing you could ever do is just sit with them in quiet. The Jewish people would call this sitting Shiva, where you just come and you just sit. And you're there, you're present, but you're not opening your mouth. You wanna know why? Because in those moments, you're tempted to say some of the dumbest things you would ever say in your life. Little pithy sayings that are the last thing that person needs to hear. You've probably, I would imagine, been on the receiving end of those at some times. And you're just like, they're trying their best. I mean, and we can, God be with them. Like, they're trying. But I would encourage you not to be that person. Not to be the one who goes and just says, just dumb things to people because you're like, I gotta say something. You actually don't. You can just sit there with them and be with them. And man, I'll tell you, if they had just kept their mouths shut, this would have been a really short book. But it also would not have been true to the human condition. We have lots of things to say when we should be quiet. Wisdom would teach us to be more quiet, I think. And most of Job are really the poetic speeches that go back and forth between Job and these 3 friends. In all of the stuff of what they're trying to deal with and what they're trying to do is they figure out what in the world happened. Why is our friend in this situation? Job, why are you here? And it opens with Job giving a beautiful but dark, almost thumping in its cadence speech in Hebrew. And so he says this about the day of his own birth. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And he said, "May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said, a boy is conceived." It goes on. He says, "That day, may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it, and no light shine on it. May gloom and utter darkness claim it once more. May a cloud settle over it. May blackness overwhelm it." In the words of Simon and Garfunkel, "Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to meet with you again." Here we are. No, I'm not singing anymore. Otherwise, this room would turn to dark and gloom. But this is the moment when, do you understand this? What suffering you're in to where you curse the day, not just of your birth, but you curse the night of your conception. The world would be a better place if I was never even born, let alone never even conceived. May it just be darkness and night and gloom. And Job begins in a place of cursing and darkness and terror. And he just unleashes all that he was starting to feel about himself because of all the circumstances that happened. And then the friends just piled on. And 30 some chapters of them going back and forth were basically what it comes down to. And you should read it at some point. in all of the highfalutin, poetic, theological language, they go, Job, you did something wrong. You got to figure it out. Somewhere along the way, you missed something, you didn't do it right, something went down. Like I'm telling you, Job, you sinned and you got to figure it out. And they go back and forth, and Job's like, I'm telling you, I didn't sin. I haven't done anything wrong. And they're like, you must have. And he's like, oh, I'm the worst in the world. May I die, may nothing ever happen. And then he's like, and God, this seems unjust. Where are you in all of this, God? And many times he's like turning his own poetic speeches to God and not even to his friends. He's like, where are you in this? Where have you gone? Are they just gonna heap words of violence upon me that are gonna remind me that I'm in the wrong, but I know I'm in the right? And here's the thing, as the reader of Job, you know what's true. You hang on to those early words of what God has said about Job, the words that Job is trying to hang on to, that he knows to be true about himself. But as your friends pile on day after day after day, heaping these words on you, you know that you start to wonder what's true and what's not. Because these three friends, are they not also the three voices inside your own head that come to visit you and come to remind you, no, you're a failure. You're a loser. You did something wrong. You missed something. You're just not enough. You're not good enough. You'll never be enough. You failed. Beyond that, you're a failure. You're not going to measure up. You're a bad mom. You're a bad dad. You're a bad employee, employer, whatever it is. Those dark voices that start to come in, and you go, is this true? And that's what you see Job doing on this massive roller coaster where he has these highs of like, God, you are high and exalted and lifted up, and I will bless your name, and I will not turn from you, down to lows of like, may I just die and go to Sheol, and may this all be over. And at one point he's like, even my own breath has become a stench to my wife. And he's not talking about like gingivitis going on there, just so you're aware, like not halitosis or any of these other dental things. He's like, literally, my very presence, my being, my spirit has become just decrepit to my own wife. The one who's telling me to curse God and die. And in all of it, not once does Job get his answer to the question of why. Why am I suffering? Why is this happening? They're just offering up all of these answers with lots of words that leave Job in despair. So finally, a man at the end of this by the name of Elihu, who is perhaps the most sinister of all, shows up out of nowhere. Now here's the thing about Elihu. People don't know what to do with him. Scholars have wondered, how do we handle this person? Some have compared him to Jesus. Some have compared him to a good counselor and a counter to all these friends. But here's the thing about Elihu that you should see. He shows up out of nowhere. And if we understand that the book of Job is showing us as above, so below, that it works like a mirror, think about the mirror. God has his council of the sons that he's meeting with, and then in comes the adversary. Job has a council he's holding with his friends, and out of nowhere, in comes Elihu. And you ask the question, because he's not been anywhere this whole time in the text, you go, where did he come from? Is that not the same question God asked of the adversary? Where did you come from? You see, it's bringing you to the same thing. And Elihu goes, I'm young, but I'm brilliant and wise, and you should listen to me. And his pride and his arrogance begin to show through, and then he begins to twist Job's words and use it as a means of condemning Job. He also has this interesting thing where all the poetry in the Hebrew up to this point is beautiful. It's incredible. And now all of a sudden, it's horrendous. It's in the words of one person, like it's inferior, vastly inferior to everything else in Job. And it's so bad that some scholars would say there is no way this was in the original book of Job. Like this, all of a sudden, like we go from beautiful poetry to just trash. And so one answer has been this was just injected later by a lesser writer. Or perhaps, and this is how I would see it, it's incredible character development by the writer of Job to show that his artistry was as malformed as his theology. He is no way near capable of being able to voice the poetry that's true, but he uses grand and grandiose language. And he starts to speak like the accuser, and he accuses Job. And unlike Job's friends, he actually says that he's speaking on God's behalf at one point in time. Like, this is like a pastor or a theologian or a trusted spiritual advisor coming alongside you and speaking words as though they were on behalf of God like a prophet. And if anything was going to make Job crack, it would have been this moment. When religious language is used to like turn our attention, you look at it, he talks about God being great and glorious and high above and challenges all the things that Job would think and what Job has done, but at the same time, the best lies come with a decent amount of truth attached to it. And all of it designed to condemn Job, to bring him to despair and to the point of finally cursing God and dying. And so in this moment, Elihu's speech, which actually in many ways gets cut off at the end, he starts talking about a storm that he sees coming. He starts using that to talk about what's happened to Job. But actually what happens is that God shows up in the storm. And in that storm, God begins to speak to Job as his accuser stood before him, trying to get him to cave. It says, then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm, and he said, who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Job, listen, bud. You don't know what you're talking about. All the things you're bringing, all the complaints, all the stuff, you just don't understand. So brace yourself like a man. And even though you've asked me questions, I'm going to question you, and you shall answer me. And then God proceeds to just ask Job question after question after question and put his creation on display with Job. He says, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? Job, who did all this? Who did it? You don't understand. You don't know. And when you start to think about it, like, guys, I don't understand my 13-year-old daughter. How in the world am I going to understand the suffering in the entire world of 8 billion people? And all the intricacies of what goes on, there is no way I'm going to get this. There's no way you're going to know. So when you start going, God, why, what, what's happening? How is this happening? Why is this happening to me? He's going, you don't understand, and you're not going to understand. But can I just put all of this on display for you? Because you weren't there when I marked off the dimensions, stretched out a measuring line, poured its footings, laid its cornerstone. And I love this line, while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. Job is just full of this mirroring. These words echo his initial cursing of the day of his birth. Job cried out for cursing and darkness and death. And God comes to him and says, no, there is morning light breaking through the darkness, and the angels will sing. Answering every bit of Job's initial cry out with a response of light over darkness and life over death, and joy, joyful singing instead of mournful cursing. And then God just starts to roll all of his creation out to Job. Have you seen this? Have you considered that? Have you thought about this? What about Behemoth? Do you know what to do with Leviathan? Laying it all out. And then Job replied to the Lord. It's like you can just see him take a breath. And he replies, I know you can do all things, and no purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? It's me. It's me. Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. This line, my ears up to this point, I had heard of you, but I'd never seen you. And so I'm going to sit here in this dust and in this ash, rejecting all that I was saying, laying myself low, and being here in complete contentment, knowing that you are God and I am not. That's where he found himself. That in the midst of all the suffering, he could just find himself at this point with God. And do you understand? It's at this moment that all the tension that has been building from that first page on starts to have a response and a resolution. As Job finds himself at this point in nothing less than a conversation with God at the climax of the story. It's all Job has asked for the whole time. He wasn't asking for the voice of his friends or the twisted voice of Elihu. He needed and wanted the voice of God. And sure, the stuff that Job has said through this has not been maybe the stuff that we should always say to God. The stuff that's true, but it was real for him. And he bore his heart out before God, and he let loose in what could only be described as prayer. As he just gave himself over to God, saying, here's what's going on, here's where I'm at. I need you to answer, I need this. And so finally here, at the climax of the moment, God comes and meets with him, and they have a conversation. Because through all of it, Job has never walked out on the relationship with God. Not once did he ever do that. And God has never walked out on him. And so they find themselves here in the midst of a relationship. A strained one, but a strained relationship is still a relationship. And he goes, I always heard, but I never saw. And I ask you this, what did he see? Because it says that God's voice spoke to him from out of the storm. How did Job see God? Was it not in all the poetic visualizations that God just offers to Job as he puts his entire creation on display in front of him and says, look at this, and you'll begin to see me. Because before Jesus, the only way God could have revealed himself would have been by saying, look at my works of my hand and see all that I've made. And then consider. And Job goes, oh, I see now. I see now. And I can rest in contentment, not having all my answers to why I suffer, but seeing who you are and seeing what you will do. And knowing that in all of this, the answer, the part that I needed to know of this answer is that I'm not alone. That you're with me. That you hear me when I cry out. And that you come and you meet with me. I just needed to know that my suffering was not pointless. I needed to know that you heard. And I needed to know that you were God. And I needed to know that I was not. That's the point that Job brings you to, where he sees God and wrestles with that. And this is what you need to see. And you need to know Because something that could go so easily missed at the end of Job, this thing that I really want you to see, is what all of Job points to through the whole way and through the whole story to give us wisdom to understand what God is doing in this world and what is happening in the midst of our suffering. Because Job is such a clear picture forward, pointing to Jesus. Because in Jesus, we have one who stepped into our suffering like Job and was not leaving us alone, but coming to be with us in that moment and in that space. And so in the wounds of Job, you can see the wounds of Christ. But also in the resurrection of Jesus, you can find the resurrection that Job saw. Here's what I want you to see. When you get to the end of Job and God restores back his fortune, his home, his wealth, his health, it says this: the Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the former part. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 donkeys, and he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And God gives him back 7 new sons and 3 new daughters. So if you look at the first part, he had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 ox, 500 donkeys, and 10 kids. Look what happens in the latter part. What does he do? Everything's doubled. 14,000, 6,000, 1,000, 1,000. Well, wait a second. Everything's doubled except for what? His kids. He only gets 10 more kids? And in the words of one mom that I talked to once who was reading this right, she says, I don't like how that ends at all, because I want God to give him back his original kids. I don't want 10 brand new ones. If something happens to my kids, I don't want replacement kids. I want my kids. Yes, that should actually absolutely be the desire. But think about this. If God's doubled the sheep, doubled the camels, doubled the ox, doubled the donkeys, why didn't he double the kids? Except he did. Do you see, by giving him 10 more kids, he was adding to the total of kids that Job already had. Because while sheep and camels and ox and donkeys are not what's going to be carried necessarily into that new creation in a way, what is true is the resurrection, and that Job is going to get his kids back as well. And so he doesn't have just 10 new kids. He has just 20 kids. And so he has 10 more kids on top of the 10 kids he already had. And so Job's hopes and fortunes are doubled throughout the whole entire thing. And Job gives us one of the clearest glimpses in the Old Testament scriptures of the idea of resurrection in an incredible way. In fact, Job will say right towards the middle of the book, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet then in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another, and my heart yearns within me for this. Because I know my Redeemer lives, and I will see him with my own flesh and blood. And you could say, and so will his kids. As the band comes up, I forgot to say that, guys, sorry. As the band comes up, I want you to know this incredible picture that it's pointing to, which matches the words of the song that we've been singing today. I know how the story ends. I know how this ends. It does not end with death and suffering taking it all. And so how can we move through suffering? Here's the thing. You need to hold on to 2 things. One, that God is with you in your suffering. He is alongside of you in it, and he has come to be with you in it. And that is so clear in the face and presence of Jesus, who came for you to be with you in that suffering. But the other part you need to hang on to is that this suffering will not last, and that God will give back all that sin and death have stolen. And there is a resurrection to come where all those sad things are made untrue. and your kids will be doubled, Job. You will have all of this. So for those of us who are looking to the work of Jesus, to the resurrection of Jesus, to the stuff that all of this points, it means that your suffering is not pointless. Hear me on this. This is what you need to know, is that through the other side is a world that you are waiting for, that your heart is yearning for. And that means I know I can walk through anything. This is what athletes who beat their bodies and train it and just move through it, like they know on the other side of this pain is a glory to come, a strength to come, something that's there. And you can know that everything that's going on, it's not because you did something wrong. So stop beating yourself up. It's that we have no clue what's going on in those heavenly realms, but what we do know is that those two things are coming back together as one. And God is going to give back what was stolen, because all who are in him will live again, breathe again, walk again, talk again, live again. And so you can place trust and confidence and hope that no matter what you deal with, God is going to make all things new in the end. That's the wisdom of Job. So I invite you to end where Job ends, with family and with feasting. Communion is here for you today. To come and take the feast that is offered to you is nothing less than Jesus. To come and participate in that and be in that space, if you would stand. Just invite you to step into this feast that is an anticipation feast, a prophetic feast of what's to come. Because you know how this story ends.